Good afternoon and good evening, potentially good morning to some of you around the world. I know we do have a number of employers and consultants joining us from across the globe based upon our RSVP checklist, so I want to first welcome everyone. My name is Andrew Stalker, and I'm the head of MetLife's employee benefits business in the Gulf. Let me be the first to welcome all of you to MetLife Gulf's second thought leadership webinar entitled Healthcare Data, How Companies Over-Collect and Underutilize. MetLife's webinar series such as this one today focus on delivering informative and topical thought leadership that impacts a broad population of the region and the world. Over the last 15 months, we've been on an exciting journey, first internally and now externally, with our intermediary partners and customers to drive data-rich discussions that result in actionable and outcome-based decisions and actions. With our recently launched data platform, we are now in a formidable position to deliver optimized healthcare spend results while actioning targeted health and wellness outcomes. Before I turn the webinar over to Michael Antwi, the head of data analytics at MetLife Gulf's employee benefits business, I want to first make a few remarks in light of the recent developments globally and locally regarding COVID-19. As the virus and response to the virus has broadened its impact on our customers, businesses, employees, and their families, MetLife is prepared to continue its response to supporting each customer based on the unique needs and concerns it has around its education and policy language. We know these are challenging times that are developing on a daily basis, and we are here to support each and every one of you. Having said that, I now have the pleasure to turn it over to my colleague and host for the day, Michael Antwi. Michael?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Andrew. And thank you to everyone that has joined us on the call today. It's a pleasure, and I look forward to the conversation that we're about to have. I'm honored to be joined today by some of my esteemed colleagues within the healthcare industry. I have Dr. Mazen Gadir, as well as Mr. Avriyan Vasilev, and I'm just going to quickly pass it over to them to introduce themselves and give us a quick overview of exactly what they do within their respective companies. Please.
Hello, everyone. Really pleased to join this forum today. My name is Avriyan Vasilev. I'm Medical Director for Gulf, and my basically interests here is to explore and in this live conversation understand where we are in terms of the healthcare data collection and utilization. We use lots of data as companies, and primarily medical information or healthcare information that we use is essential to the core business that we do in terms of the medicine development and supply. So I'm really pleased to be here together with you, and I'll pass the floor to Mazen to introduce himself, please.
Thank you, Avriyan, and thank you, Michael. So my name is Mazen Gadir. I've been in healthcare for the past 20 years. I actually come from an electrical engineering background. Then I went into quantum physics and nanotechnology, specifically cancer detection. So data has been with me for a while, and trying to exploit it and utilize it and consume it has been always a headache that I've been always wondering how to alleviate. But now I'm a director at a payer provider government in IQVIA. Used to work at Dubai Health Authority and Abu Dhabi Healthcare Services Corporation, and I had the pleasure to be with my colleagues here to discuss healthcare data today.
Excellent. So thank you both for the introduction. And I just want to start off by quickly, discussing the title of the webinar. So the title is How Companies Over-Collect and Under-Analyze. Now, a lot of times when we talk about data, it's very difficult for people to relate to it. So I have a bit of an anecdote here, a story that I'm going to tell in order to help contextualize some of the things that we'll discuss. So this is the story of Bill. So Bill, kind of like me, is someone that really enjoys shopping. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, Bill happens to work in the Dubai Mall. Now, every day on his way to work, Bill sees a store that's having a sale. And so one day he's walking and he sees a sale, so he buys a nice pair of shoes. Another day he's walking and he sees his favorite designer, maybe Hugo Boss, is having a sale, so he buys a nice shirt. This has become sort of a business as usual for Bill. Every time he's on the way to work or on the way home from work, he'll check what sales are happening, and he consistently buys and buys and buys. After some time, Bill is unable to remember what clothes he has, and ends up buying stuff that actually looks exactly like the stuff he already has in his closet. Now, the sad thing about all of this is that Bill ends up not wearing any of the clothes because he has a standard routine that he follows. He goes to work, and on the weekends, he hangs out with the same friends. And so a lot of the clothes that he buys ends up sitting there and never getting used. Now, this seemingly unrelated story is actually the story of a lot of organizations today. A lot of organizations collect a lot of information that they never end up using. In many instances, they end up collecting the same information again, which is known as redundant data. And unfortunately for them, there's a lot of potential that can be derived from using this information. So this scenario has become so widespread within the business community that a term has actually been developed for it. And that term is called dark data. So what exactly is dark data? Dark data is the information or the data that organizations and companies collect, process, and store during their regular business activities and never end up using it for any purpose. There are many examples of this kind of data, and we've listed some of them here for you to take a look at. But ultimately, this is information that, if used, could actually derive a lot of value for some of these companies. Now, broadly speaking, it is said that approximately 90% of data that is stored by companies is some form of untapped or unused dark data. And storing all of this information, as it increases, actually incurs a lot of cost for companies. Now, there are several reasons why companies have this kind of data. And the first of which is, some of the companies just haven't thought about what they can do with this data. And they haven't invested in the time to sort of analyze this information and prepare it for analysis. And so, referring back to the story of Bill, Bill has never really taken the time to think about where he can wear all the clothes he has. So he ends up just wearing the same stuff because he's used to it and he's comfortable with it. Now, some of you may be wondering, if 90% of data is actually falling under this category, it must not be that important because it hasn't really risen anybody to action. But actually, there is a lot of importance on this issue just because a lot of the information we collect in the health sector is very sensitive. And if this information is not properly protected, we can actually end up violating some laws. And as I mentioned before, there's a lot of costs incurred with storing this data. So back to the story of Bill, every time he switches apartments, he needs a bigger closet, he needs more storage space, he needs a shoe closet in order to have all of his shoes. And all of this is unnecessary cost if he's not actually using any of this for any particular purpose. Now, there's a lot of value that can be derived from this data, but the most important thing is we need to start analyzing and using the information we already have before we can even start exploring what else there is. Now, oftentimes when we start analyzing, we'll realize that maybe there are gaps in the data we have, and so we can invest in getting the right kind of data to complete the story of our company. And in some cases, we might even realize that the talent that we have is not suitable for the kinds of analysis that we need to conduct with our data. So back to the story of Bill. Bill eventually starts wearing his clothes and realizes that all the stuff he bought doesn't actually go well with each other, and he has to fill in some gaps in his wardrobe. So I'm gonna quickly pass it over to my colleagues and ask them, first and foremost, does this story resonate with you? Do you believe that the organizations that you work with or have consulted with effectively use data? So I'll start off with Mazen.
Sure. So I believe the story fits in like a glove. To be honest, the question of having and storing and having enough data has always been is a holy grail of questions, right? The idea is that yes, there is a lot of storage space that we need, a lot of data that we can collect, and then what, right? So people are just building databases, putting cloud mechanisms to actually upload data, and then the bigger question comes in is, okay, do we understand the data? Do we understand what sort of classification and types of data that we're collecting? Can we trend this data? Can we build trends? Can we actually mold it in a way that it makes sense? How do you actually dissect it in different ways to make sense? So making sense of the data is basically the other story of Bill's example, is having a lot of clothes in his closet, but then how does this build into a sustainable model of utilization? How is he going to go and bring in maybe some sort of a data input reader to know the different brands that you've inputted? Divide that by season, some for the summer, some for the winter. So again, imagine now Bill bringing AI algorithms that actually could read the different sizes, read different colors, and understand what, based on his mood of that day, and the expiry of that kind of product, if it's actually expired in every way. Maybe it could be smaller than the size. Maybe it's modeled against his weight. So again, how do you play the build story to try and look at some of the concerns? But yes, the main concern of the current organization at the moment, it's not about having enough storage size. It's about, what do I do with all this? How can I make sense out of the data I'm collecting? How much of it is structured and how much of it is unstructured? And what am I going to do with the unstructured? And later on, we'll talk about some of the initiatives that are happening across the board.
Excellent, excellent. Adrian, do you have anything to comment?
Yeah, so working for a very patient-centric organization, we were asking these questions about data for a long time, and then in 2014 we were the first company basically to think about providing access to anonymized patient-level data for the secondary research. So this topic is very close to me, because you can go for any of the studies that we run, it becomes public before the study runs, like in terms of the study protocol, and then later when all the data acquisition piece finishes, researchers and different interested parties, like academia or individual researchers, can get access to this data and reutilize it, or to use sort of meta-analysis type of studies. So this is very important. We should never forget about the ethical side of the story, because data acquisition, and basically you mentioned that very rightly, that acquiring data is probably a very simple part of the story. More difficult is how we store it and how we protect it these days. And there are many initiatives done by companies, and in particular by GSK, on how to protect this data, but also on how we store it over time and how we make it available for the research. So coming back to this poor Bill story, so for example, we know that we basically, something that you've explained is the longitudinal projection of what happens, right? So it's the data itself, but do we know if Bill consented to provide this data to you? Or so these type of questions are very important for us. So whenever we touch the data, we first have to understand whether it has been properly collected. And this is why some of the data is going to be dark and will stay dark and will never be analyzed, because we don't have the proper mechanisms of consenting. That's a very important topic. The other side maybe of the story is about making the right analysis, because again, from the ethical point of view, you can make the analysis going and then driving the wrong type of the decisions, right?
Yeah.
So a very interesting representation is, for example, the anatomical atlas, which is a masterpiece of the scientific anatomical drawings. But it has been collected, it built based on the data by NASA, for example. So, and the ethical question arises, shall we use this material, or shall we basically use it with a disclaimer, or shall we dump it? So it's very important to remember all the time that ethical considerations, both on the acquisition side and throughout the collection storage, is something that is related to individuals and those who basically produce the data.
Absolutely. And it's very interesting to me because the health sector is extremely diverse, and there's many different verticals within the sector. I know Avriyan specifically is coming from a pharmaceutical background. I myself work for a medical insurer, and Mazen is working with a consultancy which kind of can span across the entire sector. So we all bring a different lens to sort of the use, collection, and analysis of data. And there's different protocol that's involved in each of our areas of work when it comes to analyzing the information that we have. Okay, perfect. So I want to bring the conversation into healthcare now, more specifically into healthcare, and to talk about the importance of data within healthcare. Now, as I mentioned, the healthcare industry is extremely diverse and it's extremely complicated. Now, although we may have a lot of the same structures as other companies, we're also very unique in many ways. First and foremost, I think healthcare is an industry that is heavily regulated with varying types of regulations depending on the type of country that you go to. Even here within the UAE, there's another complication because you have different jurisdictions based on the Emirates, so it's even a subnational type of regulation as well. And then there's also sort of the issue of having to be present and having to be extra resilient. So I'll use the example of COVID-19, which Andrew spoke about briefly. In the current crisis that's happening, what we're seeing is that there's a rapid spread of disease across countries. Now, in order for a lot of companies to effectively manage this, some companies may experience supply chain challenges in which they may have to sort of adjust turnaround time for some of their products. Some companies may experience operational issues where some of their employees may be unable to attend work. But unfortunately for healthcare organizations, in addition to some of these challenges, they still have to operate and help address the challenge that is being presented by the virus. So for instance, hospitals must now effectively use data in order to assess the risk of the disease within their appropriate jurisdiction, assess how much staff they need to have in order to address the challenge so that they're not overstaffed to risk spreading the disease further, but also that they don't reach a situation where there's too many people showing up and they don't have enough people to help address the issue. So these are some of the complications that arise in healthcare and require us to be very sharp in the way we use data. Yep. Now, unfortunately, there are some challenges that present themselves when we're trying to use data within the health sector. And these challenges, I've sort of categorized them into three broad buckets. The first one is human capital, and this is really talent. In order for people to do effective data analysis and provide insight, you need people that are good with numbers. You need people that are good communicators and good storytellers. And you also need people that have strong business understanding, or at least a group of people that have all of these skill sets in one. And that might not always be the case in the region. And in a recent study, it was found that 32% of UAE firms have a team of data scientists for all of their analytic work. So this leaves a significant majority of firms that don't have this capability. And many of them said that it's because they just can't find the right people. The second area is data dyssynergy. Now, this is a fancy word for saying that the data
Data needs to be collected in a certain kind of way and stored and related in a certain kind of way in order for us to do something useful with it. But when this doesn't exist, it creates a lot of challenges. So, for instance, let's go back to COVID-19. Imagine companies, countries are sending, disease information to a pharmaceutical company that wants to develop a drug. Now, all of the data is coming in different languages. In some countries, they collect incidence data every 6 hours. In some countries, it's every day. In some countries, it's every hour. And all of this is dumped on the pharmaceutical company, and they have to figure out what to do with it. The data needs to have some sort of synergy and some sort of connection in order for us to use it effectively. And the last area is culture. Analytics requires a culture within organizations to allow data scientists the creativity to explore data and find answers that might not be the answers that senior leadership want to hear. So with these three components, we have a very complicated issue around analyzing healthcare data and deriving value from data. So I want to start off with you, Avrian. Do these three buckets make sense to you? Do you think I missed anything? And which of these three buckets do you think is the most important, or that you've seen to be the most important in your work?
Yeah, thank you. You definitely nailed key elements here. It's a very broad sort of grouping, but definitely these directions like human capital, culture, and the synergy are affecting the way we effectively use the data.
So as we were saying, there are some challenges that are present when we're trying to use data for the work that we do. And these challenges can be categorized in three broad buckets: human capital, culture, and data dyssynergy. And so this is really talent, sort of the attitude that our companies have around data and how our data is structured, collected, and all of the different components revolving around that data. So where we left off, my colleague Avrian was telling me a little bit about whether or not he agrees with my characterization of the challenges and if there's any gaps in the way I analyzed it.
Yeah, thank you. So basically, the summary, yes, these are very good three swim lanes to think about and structure thinking about the gaps or the areas where we need to think how to improve. And because anything that you need to action is something that is requiring a structured approach here. So from the human capital, I would say that probably it's a fewer issue so far to me as the representative from the pharma organization. You can always find very good capability, and you can always try to build that capability further. So a great example is that GSK has a initiative which is basically easily accessible at gsk.ai, where we basically try to install some fellowship programs for people who are interested, and then we use the artificial intelligence in the transformational medicine discovery. Some other things, like in terms of the collaboration, includes the exclusive collaboration with 23andMe, the company that deals with consumer genetics and research company, or UK Biobank, where you get the unique data science skills. We can mention the collaboration between GSK and FinGen, and that's a joint collaboration with Sanofi, and that's a large-scale genome study of the Finnish population we do together. So the competency, I think, is there. The culture piece is something that probably is a little bit behind, where I would spend like a little bit more attention, because data is acquired over whatever we do throughout the research, throughout the analysis, like analysis of the market, of the healthcare, or how we support our insurers or insurance payers, and like pretty much everywhere. But the question is, do we factor the analysis after the action of what has been done? and do we deliberately pay some attention whether it has to be done as part of the necessary step of the after action or future prediction, as Martin mentioned before, because predicting future steps for something like to optimize or something to improve is very important. The last piece is the synergy. We are getting better in that one as well, but of course, having lots of buckets of data, you can have lots of data coming from devices, lots of data coming from within the hospitals or healthcare system itself, and the government as well, because there is a monopoly from the government on owning lots of chunks of data, which we even didn't start considering to analyze, and sometimes within the government that there is not enough capacities or capabilities to do that. So the collaboration, something that I started with, which talks about the culture and talks about the human capital, the collaboration would be key for the future in terms of data analytics.
I agree. And I think you touched on a very important point there, and that's the notion of government, because I think the government plays a very important role in the health sector. They play an important role in the collection of data and the analysis of data within the health sector. And a lot of governments often publish data and reports in order to guide organizations that are working within this sector. So I want to direct the next question to Mazen, and going back to sort of the three pillars, which area do you think is the biggest challenge for your work that you've done with different government bodies around healthcare data?
So I think in the region, and and coming from a data science, human data science company like IQVIA, where we deal with over 2 trillion data points, definitely the human or the capital, the talent, the lack of skills, competencies is a huge issue, specifically in this region. As you mentioned in your stat, you said 30% or over 30% of the company have some sort of a data science department. I guess that's just in a private, in a company's work, in the private sector. If you look at it in a healthcare perspective, I think that percentage goes a little bit lower, knowing that insurance and the pharma are leading the way, but providers and, for example, government, they are still yet to latch on to bring in the skill set. The three pillars that you've said, you've nicely highlighted. I would add a fourth pillar to it, which is the data governance. Again, data governance is a huge issue. The fact that there's a lot of laws are coming, and I think there will be some allusion to the healthcare ICT law that is obviously looking at the health data and regulations associated with it. Still, over I guess my humble experience in the healthcare space in the last 11 years in this region, data scientists are yet to be exploited in healthcare. And I was reading a piece of an article about the data science unit in Liverpool Football Club. Liverpool Football Club in the Premiership, right? They have a data science unit. They have a data analytics unit. And they have employed the best of data scientists from Oxford and Cambridge to leverage data. Imagine that. This is just a simple football team.
Yeah.
Look at the amount of data we have in healthcare. 80% of the data we have in healthcare is unstructured.
Yeah.
We have people, as mentioned earlier by Ariane, the silos. There's a lot of data that is being collected by EMR, electronic medical records, and hospitals and across the country. But how much of that data is actually is being consumed to build trends, to forecast? That's why when you said the third pillar, the synergy, and I related it to the data consumption, the lack of skills to try and understand how data could be dissected and molded in some sort of a comprehensive framework to make sense, and it's a data simplification. How do we take this amount of data that we have? And it's yes, we haven't even talked about genomics. We haven't talked about all the data we get from the clinical trials, the amount of the billions of gigabytes that we get from the clinical trials, from the, from the genomics research, from all over the other sources of data. And how would you scale up? So my biggest challenge, or the biggest challenge I've seen, and we're trying to work with our partners to try and develop the skill set, the data scientists, the biostatisticians, the epidemiologists, but they are also health economists. People who can relate data. Data could be molded in a way. You pull data from pharma, anonymize it. Obviously, the governance, the data governance layer. Who is actually well-versed and well-skilled to do the data anonymization, the data governance layer, from which then you can actually build your pool of data and then build your consumption tools on top of that. So now, consumption tools, you said you need your biostatisticians, your mathematicians, your health economists, your data scientists. Do we graduate enough of those? Do we import enough of those from outside? In this region, skill set is a big gap.
Yeah,
that's my thought.
That's very interesting, and I think Ariane has a comment.
Yeah, so just to add, because basically health technology assessments, which we all strive to get, and basically something to inform our like payer decisions and then effectiveness, efficacy decisions like related to the cost or the effectiveness of or efficacy of the medicines, is key and is not possible without the set of skills that you mentioned. So that's vital to start building capability, not just thinking like broad about the state, but also within accounts who can afford to start thinking about that, because basically payer decisions are highly dependent on what kind of and how the data is analyzed at the end of the day. And then health assessments, is it going to be the health technology assessment or even value assessment of the introduction of the intervention or introduction of the medicine, introduction of, simple solutions, can only be done using the data and proper people behind.
Absolutely. And, I want to go back to sort of the point that Mazen brought up, and that's the fourth pillar, data governance. And, that's a huge oversight on my part, because that's such an important component, especially in this market. And closely linked to this is sort of health data privacy and sort of the laws and regulations that surround all of that. And, we live in a region where laws can change quite rapidly. And so keeping up to date with all of this can actually pose a big challenge for organizations as they're trying to derive value out of data, but also protect the privacy of the people that they're collecting this data from. So I think that's a very important point there. Now, we've talked a lot about challenges. We've covered some of the issues that we have with, for instance, human capital, which Mazen thinks seems to be lacking in the region, but Ariane thinks that there's sufficient, talent within the region. So that speaks to the diversity that exists within the healthcare industry. We've also talked a little bit about the challenges with culture. And I think this is very real, because culture is one of those things that are intangible. You can't put an ad on LinkedIn to recruit for someone that has, data analytic culture to join your organization. It just doesn't work that way. It's something that starts from the top down, and is sort of woven into the cultural fabric of the entire organization. So with all of these challenges that we've outlined, I want to talk a little bit about the opportunities. How can companies start to better use their data? And so I want to structure this part of the conversation in two ways. First and foremost, I want to talk about what exists. So what are some of the resources that exist that allow us to address some of these challenges? And then afterwards, we'll talk about what's missing that we think should exist. So maybe the first question can go to Mazen. Can you provide an overview of the kind of health data or other kinds of resources that are available to companies working within this space that want to better use their data?
Sure. So there's a lot of, let's start with the government. So the government initiatives, and let's be focused on Dubai government. Dubai government has started a lot of initiatives in the past few years to look at, for example, data. So Smart Dubai itself as an entity was created to leverage this untapped oil of this century data. That's to begin with on a governmental level. the health industry, there are a lot of healthcare initiatives masterminded by the government authorities and the ministries to look at unified medical records as a huge source of data. Obviously, there's the 10x genomics program that they want to bring in, just like the UK, where they want to do the first 100,000, for example, genomic sequencing. So that's, again, another source of data where the government is trying to push for transformation towards data utilization. Don't forget, the whole healthcare industry is undergoing a value-based transformation because spending is unsustainable. Healthcare expenditure is unsustainable. The amount of money that is being spent actually does not justify the quality of care and output that we produce. This is the initial equation. From that, what helps us to make sense out of our services and to magnify our outcome is by looking at data. You'll see a lot of the big projects now are creating dashboards, KPI dashboards in healthcare organizations. Saudi Arabia, in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, they have all those huge programs, unified centralized dashboards. They also have those unified centralized medical record platforms to try and aggregate data. A lot of projects on aggregation of data. And then they start to build all the capacity or the capabilities they have, tools, AI, obviously bring in some of the data science and data consumption mechanisms and methodologies to try and crunch some of that by forming partnerships. Some of the healthcare organizations and authorities are partnering with telecom companies, with pharma companies, to try and leverage the innovation, to try and see how can we actually utilize their capabilities to manage oceans of data. Yeah. So currently, there's a lot of push, and we can see a lot of initiatives, one initiative after the other. One of the most recent initiatives is actually trying to look at the power of virtual medicine and mHealth, telehealth, to try and utilize the data fluidity and access to patients through virtual means.
And are you seeing sort of any positive outcomes of any of these? I'm not sure if some of these initiatives that you've outlined are new, but are they initiatives that you believe are starting to bear fruit, or they're just at very nascent stages?
To be honest, I think that it's still maturing, so it's an early stage.
Yeah.
I would give it another 5 to 10 years, specifically from a government perspective.
Yeah.
As now the race has begun to try and uncover and unearth the power of data.
Yeah.
And the race has started from multiple avenues, multiple dimensions, looking at KPI dashboards, looking at medical records, looking at genomics, innovation and partnerships. So there is a lot of activity in that sense. The actual outcome and the output of these initiatives will be felt gradually as we go in the next few years.
Okay. And so, Avriyan, sort of, going off of that, we've been given a bit of an overview from a governmental perspective. In your opinion, as a very niche organization within a sliver of the healthcare industry, what opportunities do you believe exist to close some of the gaps that you are witnessing with the use of data?
Yeah, so the first thing to continue the story on the governmental efforts is that we have to acknowledge that the government provides us with the basic regulations around the health data protection. So pretty much everyone is aware about the GDPR regulations, but something that emerges here is the federal law concerning the use of the information and communication technology in the area of health. So it's a very specific piece of legislation regulating the health data. So that's a very good signal for pretty much everyone. Again, like in terms of the application and how to utilize how to apply this law is something for us to work on. But it's a very good signal in terms of protecting from the government, protecting the rights and basic rights of the people who live in UAE.
And if I could just touch on that very briefly. So this is a new health data law that has been implemented by the UAE government. And as we discussed a little bit earlier, there might not be a lot of publicity around these types of things. And I'd be curious if some of the people that are on the call, if you could sort of send some comments to let us know if you're aware of this law, and if you've had any sort of internal communications within your organizations to see how you can apply this law within your organization. I'd be curious to hear that, because as you rightfully said, sometimes the communication can be a little bit challenging. So I'll allow you to continue.
That's great, because my impression from working with different companies and stakeholders within UAE demonstrate that there is lack of awareness. So it's a very good question, and would be great to hear from people. So I really encourage you to respond to this question. And basically, the law will regulate very important areas of data collection at the hospital level, as like how to transmit it, where to transmit it, can we transmit it overseas, like outside of UAE? Can we put our hands as an industry on the clinical data, and what are the precautions around that process of analyzing the already acquired data? So it's a very good starting point. So I would like to underline that it's better than when you don't have anything and it becomes like a Wild West and a prairie, because people don't feel protected there. For the purposes of thinking, what else do we have? I know that, for example, for the HTA sort of vision for the Ministry of Health, they want to install some, and there is vision on.
One sec, HTA is in Health Technology Assessment?
Health Technology
Assessment. Perfect. Just for anybody that might have missed the acronym.
So basically, it's the basic function, which, and then there are plenty of countries who have different levels of implementation of the Health Technology Assessment. And it's basically the function of the payer or the government to consider implementation of certain health technologies, right? So it could be medicines, it could be a device, anything like. So in order to make those decisions, you have to have people and the structure and the structured way of supplying that information and then analyzing that information. And I can see a very, very much growing interest in UAE around that. And we work as the industry to share that knowledge with the Ministry of Health on best examples across the world, and then to bring best experts here to talk about the health technology assessment, how it's going to work, and maybe to provide best examples. So that's one of the also good signals for us, because the decisions made within the healthcare will become more informed, more based on the data that you were referring to, like the dark data, right? Mm-hmm. So it doesn't become dark, it becomes like open. Mm-hmm. The next element is the regulations around the clinical research. So these become more clear, these become more implemented for the Abu Dhabi, for Dubai as well. So we have much more harmonized with what global companies used to work with and other companies. So it's also sending a good signal for the investment, for the right way of collecting data, the right way of analyzing data, obligations to publish the data as well, or what GSK does all the time, irrespective of the results. But some other companies might need to have the guidance on the fact that if you run research, you have to publish it, or you have to disclose the outcome of the research. So these are very good signals for the UAE to become a area of advanced like data analytics, and because I mean all of the science that Mazen mentioned as well about the systems implemented here, they are bold.
Yeah.
So we hope that pretty much everything in the healthcare is going to be also systematically correct and bold.
Yeah. So I heard a lot coming out of both of you, and I just want to very quickly summarize that for the audience. So it sounds like there's a lot going on at the moment to sort of help address some of the challenges that exist. Mazen talked about some of the initiatives with Smart Dubai, with the 10x Genomics project. So there is a lot that's being done. However, it seems like one of the main gaps that need to be addressed is communication. So making people aware of some of these initiatives that are underway, making people aware of some of the regulations that are coming about and how they can apply them to their organization. And part of communication is also transparency of data. So publishing results of clinical trials is something that would add a lot of value for companies that are trying to work within this space. I'm sure hospitals and healthcare providers would find that kind of information helpful. And just more broadly, it leads to healthier health outcomes, let's put it that way. And going back to what we said earlier in the conversation, you know, there's also the issue of talent and culture, which can be addressed in a myriad of ways, but I guess that would really be incumbent on the HRs of specific companies to see what's the best way to approach that, whether it be, you know, finding talent through working with consultancies, finding talent through bringing people in from abroad, or finding talent through cultivating people within your own organization to rise up to the occasion. And then last but not least is culture. Now that is one of those things that you really can't fix. Like it's tough, and it really takes a significant concerted effort from leadership across all organizations, across governments to really drive people. And so that one, I think I'm gonna just leave it there. So I wanna end off our conversation before we open it up for questions from the participants. I hope you guys would stick with us. I know we have some technical issues, so we're going a little bit tight on time. But I wanna ask Avriyan and Mazen about the UAE in general. So on January 4th, Sheikh Mohammed unveiled his vision for the next 50 years. And within this vision, he outlined 6 growth pillars. And so these are areas that he expects to see a lot of growth in the next 50 years. And one of these areas was health and knowledge. So I pose this question to both of you. What role do you think data will play in materializing the Sheikh's vision? You can start, Mazen.
Sure. So I think his vision is, when it comes to healthcare, we will have to explore marrying 3 major concepts. And again, having been part of IQVIA, you're bringing human data with data science and human science. Marrying those 3 concepts is actually in line with His Highness' vision. His Highness wants to revolutionize the way we look at healthcare. He wants to look at, for the next 50 years, what are we going to do to bring in space medicine? If you think about space medicine, you're thinking about a lot of behavioral health data. We're talking about social determinants. We're talking about non-evidence-driven data, all mostly focused on the human behavioral side of it. So psychological assessment, psychiatric assessment. How do you actually take that much data and add it to your data repository and try to make sense out of it, try to analyze it. One of the tools that we have is called informatics. It takes unstructured data and it literally moves it into structured data to try and start analyzing this. Again, the importance of research. You mentioned it earlier, how you can anonymize data, and this will unlock the power of real data, because then you can take this data and play with it and mold it and research it heavily. So again, His Highness is looking, how do we actually go beyond your normal health? How do we actually exploit the art of genomics? How do we look at young forever concepts? You know, bio edits of your genome, right? Again, trying to look at innovating healthcare for the next 50 years, because no longer do I just need to start collecting data from your electronic medical record, from your wearables. What am I going to do with this now? Yeah. Because you can create all that much repositories to actually bring in all this data into it. But where would you actually inflict the decision-making influence? How do you influence that? How do you enhance that decision-making? Instead of taking you that long to diagnose a level 1 cancer patient, how do you cut down the time to actually get the screening done at a very early stage using, for example, genomic editing or genetic testing, for example. So again, the art of forecasting, the art of actually trying to proactively predict. So how do you move from data to wisdom in a short space of time? From just analytics to predictive analytics. This is the art. So again, His Highness, he has a wide vision, a 50-year plan that he wants to, all the industries to work towards. Data is a core part, a backbone of every strategy in every industry to look at the next.
Oh, excellent. And I pose the same question to Adrian.
Thank you. So for the
UAE authorities, and I think that we share that this data is something that we will work on to deliver benefits for the people we live with, right? So I think that this is something that for us it was important to see that all of these plans built for long term, they end up in better healthcare. It's not about optimizing the cost. It's not about optimizing the logistics or manufacturing. It's about resulting in better healthcare outcomes for the people who live here. So I think it's a great, great vision and very prominent. I think that there are lots of work to be done there, lots of work to be done, but it's better to construct something great, achievable, I think, than just, go with flow. So I think it's a very good direction set.
Yeah, and I think healthcare is definitely an area that the UAE is looking to shine, especially within the region. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on to some of the questions from the attendees. And the first question I'm seeing here is, what are different algorithm bias and how to deal with AI algorithm bias? So I don't know if any of you guys want to take it, or if you have a thought on it.
So to be honest, I'm just I guess what I wanted to maybe understand a little bit more is obviously the actual need for artificial intelligence and the different ways of machine learning algorithms that you can put together in order to manifest and consume data is one of the mechanisms that will enable us to make sense out of data. But I want to understand more in terms of the bias algorithm. But I have no.
Yeah, if the person that sent that question can clarify a bit. I mean, if I were to just comment on it very briefly, AI is you train your AI algorithms with data you already have. So, I mean, it could be that the data that you're training the AI robot with has some inherent bias in it. And so perhaps that can be a data collection issue. If you're aware of the kinds of bias that already exist within some of your algorithms, you can also control for that by stratifying data. So it really depends on what kind of bias you're talking about. So if you can give a little bit more clarification, we can maybe speak to that a little bit more.
I can add because again, AI becomes very popular nowadays. So what I did, I started a very nice. So there are plenty of courses around AI online, and then one of the good ones that I can recommend is the MIT one. So people who are interested more to hear about the AI and machine learning, they can go for the MIT course and get this from professionals, because I'm a physician by training, and I don't know if anyone can dwell too deep into understanding bias and explaining this to this audience. I don't know.
Yeah.
So, to be honest, I mean, we are looking at, for example, eliminating human bias by introducing AI at this stage. So, I mean, when you come into the field where you're now looking at AI algorithm and you're trying to eliminate bias, that's definitely advanced level.
Yeah.
Of creating a mechanism that will allow you a decent and a very transparent decision-making option. So, for example, the concept of biasness, we are looking at, for example, one of the projects we are doing in the Dubai Authority to try and take all the way that KPIs are being measured across all the providers from human interaction to try and eliminate the biasness into automatic or digitized in a digitized fashion.
Yeah.
But then once it's digitized, definitely once you can build algorithms on top of that, and you can try to eliminate bias in that by trying to stratify the data, as you said, using the samples and retesting it multiple times. Absolutely. But again, that's a very advanced. I would love to attend that course actually, the MIT AI course. But I think this is a extremely advanced level of, of purifying your algorithm to actually drive efficiency, effectiveness in the decision-making process.
Yeah, and so we'll take one more question. The second question that we'll take, do you think that there's transparency when it comes to data within this region?
Transparency is not there in a full way, in a full fashion.
Mm-hmm.
There is still a lot of work to be done to embed transparency. For example, you don't find medical errors reports being published in this region.
Yeah.
So we can state the fact that transparency is still yet to be in the healthcare data generation or healthcare reports. We're still yet to work on that. We're still yet to improve that.
Mm-hmm.
The initiatives that have been masterminded and being operated at the moment tries to drive transparency to the highest level by exploring dashboards that you can publish out to the population, by taking anonymized data and open it out, but still yet to. So my short answer, there's a lot of work to be done in that.
Yeah. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, so just to follow up the training piece, like if you can join to my LinkedIn page, that I've listed some of the trainings by Google, by Stanford machine learning pieces. Like you can have a look there on the post and basically try what works best for you. Let's say it covers like deep learning, machine learning, and the artificial intelligence pieces. So coming back to your question, if I would say about like transparency here, I would more think again coming back to whether we collect data the right way. So there is room to go in terms of ensuring that the data we collect through marketing channels, hospitals, anywhere else is collected the right way with the consent from those who are basically the data owners, right? And this is something that is a big problem everywhere, but maybe here in the region it's a little bit more exaggerated because these controls are very new in terms of how we control the data collection. So I think that from that point of view, like transparency, how we collected some of the data and both it relates to governmental and non-governmental sectors is important piece. So I will talk more about that transparency.
Yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, I think it's time to end the webinar. I want to thank everybody that was able to join us and those that were able to stick with us through some of the technical challenges that we had. I hope you found the conversation to be valuable. We covered a lot, and we're happy to follow up on any of the topics that were covered. If you'd like, you can send an email to myself, and we can continue the conversation through correspondence. I'd like to thank my colleagues here, Dr. Avriyan Vasilev, Dr. Mazen Gadir for joining me. And once again, thank you. Look out for MetLife's upcoming webinar. We'll be, publishing information on that very soon. And we hope that you'll stick with us through these thought leadership series. And thank you again for all of your time.
Okay, have a nice day.